My name is Mia, and I'm 32 years old. This is the story of how I finally escaped a marriage that had slowly drained the life out of me. It's not a tale I ever thought I'd share, but I hope that by doing so, someone else might find the courage to stand up for themselves and reclaim their life. I met Logan through my cousin Nate. Nate and Logan were college roommates, and one day, Nate brought Logan along to a family barbecue. Logan had this magnetic energy about him, charming, confident, and the kind of guy who seemed to light up any room he walked into. We clicked instantly. Over the following weeks, he made every effort to sweep me off my feet. Flowers at my office, surprise dates, endless compliments. It was a whirlwind romance that felt too good to be true. We got engaged after a year of dating, and I was over the moon. My family adored him, especially Nate, who kept saying how lucky I was to have found such a great guy. Our wedding was a dream, the perfect venue, surrounded by family and friends, and Logan's heartfelt vows that brought everyone to tears. I truly believed I was stepping into a life of love and partnership. Things started to change not long after we got married. Logan suggested we move in with his mother, Diane. He said she was struggling with loneliness after losing her husband, and it would be a way to save money while we planned for the future. I hesitated. I loved my job as a graphic designer, and the thought of uprooting my life to live with my mother-in-law made me uneasy. But Logan was persuasive, painting a picture of family unity and financial stability. Against my better judgment, I agreed. At first, it wasn't so bad. Diane was polite and seemed genuinely happy to have us there. I kept working and tried my best to contribute around the house, helping with chores and making an effort to bond with her. But after a few months, Logan started dropping hints that I should quit my job. "You're always so busy," he'd say. "Wouldn't it be nice to have more time to focus on the house and spend with Diane?" The idea of leaving a job I loved felt like giving up a part of myself. I'd worked hard to build my career, and I wasn't ready to let that go. But Logan kept pushing, and Diane subtly reinforced his arguments with comments about how a real wife prioritizes her family over a paycheck. Eventually, I caved. I told myself it was temporary, that I could always go back to work once we'd saved some money, or Diane was feeling better. I should have known better. Once I was at home full-time, the dynamic shifted. Diane's polite demeanor faded, replaced by a constant stream of criticism. "You missed a spot when you mopped the kitchen," she'd point out. "The laundry's piling up. Don't you think you should manage your time better?" Every day felt like walking on eggshells, trying to anticipate her next complaint. Logan, instead of defending me, started echoing her sentiments. "She's just trying to help you improve," he'd say when I confided in him. "You need to stop being so sensitive." Gradually, I realized that I wasn't a partner in this household. I was the maid, the cook, the emotional punching bag. The breaking point came 3 years into our marriage when I became pregnant with our daughter, Lily. I thought having a child might soften Logan and Diane, bring out their more compassionate sides. But instead, it only added to my burdens. Logan's temper grew shorter, and Diane's demands became more unreasonable. One evening, while I was 6 months pregnant, I had spent the entire day cleaning, cooking, and preparing the guest room for Diane's friends who were coming to visit. By the time they arrived, I was exhausted. As I sat down to rest, Diane walked in and scoffed. "Sitting already? There's still so much to do," she said, her tone dripping with disapproval. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but forced a smile and got up to continue working. Logan came home later that night, and instead of acknowledging my efforts, he asked why dinner wasn't ready yet. "I've been busy all day," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Busy doing what?" he shot back, his voice laced with irritation. "You're at home all day. How hard can it be?" That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how my life had come to this. The man who had once showered me with love and affection now treated me like an inconvenience. The woman I had tried to help and bond with saw me as nothing more than a servant, and I had no one to turn to. Logan had isolated me from my friends and family, subtly but effectively. He'd make comments like, "Your mom's always so critical of me," or "Your friends don't really understand our dynamic," until I started to feel guilty for even wanting to maintain those relationships. The birth of Lily brought a brief moment of joy. She was perfect, her tiny fingers gripping mine as if to remind me that I wasn't completely alone. But even that joy was overshadowed by the constant tension in the house. Diane's criticisms extended to my parenting, and Logan's temper grew worse. One night, after a particularly heated argument where Logan accused me of being a terrible wife and a mediocre mother, I knew I couldn't take it anymore. Something inside me snapped. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Lily. I didn't want her growing up in a household where she'd think this was normal, where she'd learn that it was okay to be treated like this. That night, as I held her close and she drifted off to sleep, I made a promise to her and to myself. We deserved better. We deserved peace, respect, and freedom, and I was going to find a way to give us that. Little did I know, the journey ahead would test me in ways I'd never imagined. But for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. The weeks following that chaotic family lunch were a whirlwind of tension and quiet fury. I tried my best to maintain peace in the house, juggling the endless list of Diana's demands while tiptoeing around Thomas's simmering temper. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. Diana's visits turned into daily rituals. She'd march into the house, her sharp heels echoing like a countdown to another criticism. "Mia, this kitchen is a disaster," she'd announce, waving her hand dramatically over a barely visible speck of dust on the counter. "How do you expect to raise a family when you can't even keep a home clean?" I swallowed my pride, as always, and cleaned again. But it didn't stop there. Diana's friends were now frequent guests, their judgmental eyes scanning every inch of the house as if it were an exhibit to critique. The once peaceful sanctuary I'd envisioned was now a battleground of expectations, and I was the soldier losing the war. One particularly grueling day, I overheard Diana whispering to Thomas in the living room. "She's not good enough for you," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "She can't even manage a house properly. You'd be better off without her." I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart pounding. When Thomas didn't defend me, the blow was almost physical. I wanted to storm in and demand an explanation, but what would that achieve? Instead, I retreated to the bedroom, the weight of their words settling over me like a heavy blanket. The breaking point came a few weeks later. Diana's latest demand was a last-minute dinner party for her extended family. I had less than a day to prepare an elaborate feast, clean the house, and ensure everything was perfect. By the time the guests arrived, I was running on fumes. The evening started smoothly, but it didn't take long for things to unravel. One of Diana's cousins made a snide comment about the overcooked roast. Diana, ever eager to pile on, loudly agreed. "Mia, you really should take a cooking class," she said with a forced laugh that made my cheeks burn. Thomas, instead of defending me, chuckled along. "She's still learning," he said dismissively, as if I were a child trying to ride a bike. I excused myself and fled to the kitchen, tears threatening to spill. As I stood there, gripping the edge of the counter for support, I realized something. This wasn't a partnership. This wasn't the marriage I'd dreamed of. I was nothing more than a convenience for them, a tool to make their lives easier. Later that night, I confronted Thomas. "Do you even see what's happening here?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Your mother humiliates me, and you're right there backing her up. Do you even care about how I feel?" He rolled his eyes. "You're overreacting, Mia. Mom's just trying to help you improve. Maybe you should listen." "Improve?" I echoed, my voice rising. "Improve for what? So I can meet your impossible standards? This isn't a marriage, Thomas. This is servitude." His expression darkened. "If you can't handle it, maybe you're not cut out to be a wife," he said coldly before storming out of the room. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. For the first time, I allowed myself to question everything: our marriage, my sacrifices, and the future I wanted for myself. It was a terrifying thought, but also liberating. I didn't have to stay trapped in this life. The next day, I started to make small changes. I began setting aside money from the household budget, carefully saving in secret. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I also reached out to an old friend, Sarah, who I hadn't spoken to in years. We met for coffee, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like myself again. "Mia, you don't have to live like this," Sarah said, after I shared my struggles. "You deserve better. You're stronger than you think." Her words stuck with me. Slowly, I began to see glimpses of a future where I wasn't under Diana's thumb or at Thomas's mercy, a future where I could breathe freely. But just as I started to regain some confidence, Thomas dropped a bombshell. He announced that he was taking out a loan against the house I'd worked so hard to build. "It's for investments," he said casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I was stunned. "You didn't even discuss this with me," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "I don't need your permission," he snapped. "The house is in my name, remember?" I felt the ground shift beneath me. My hard work, my sacrifices, everything I'd poured into that house. It was all slipping away, and Thomas didn't care. That night, I opened my journal and began documenting everything: Diana's insults, Thomas's dismissive remarks, the financial decisions made without my input. I didn't know what my next steps would be, but I knew I needed a record, something to hold on to when the storm inevitably hit. Because deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. As months passed, the suffocating grip of Thomas and Evelyn's household became unbearable. Evelyn's constant criticisms grew sharper, her demands more relentless. It was as though she thrived on finding fault with me, each remark another crack in my resolve. Thomas, once my partner and confidant, was now a distant echo of the man I'd married. He dismissed my frustrations, his unwavering loyalty to his mother, ensuring I had no ally in that house. The day everything began to unravel started innocuously enough. Evelyn had once again invited her friends over for one of her infamous tea gatherings, a recurring event where she paraded her perceived superiority. That morning, she handed me an extensive list of preparations: scones, finger sandwiches, and an assortment of teas. Her instructions came with a sneer, a reminder of my place in the hierarchy. "Make sure everything's perfect this time, Delia," she said sharply. The last time was lacking. I bit my tongue, swallowing my retort. By now, I had perfected the art of silent endurance. The morning blurred into a frenzy of baking, cleaning, and setting up the dining area. Alice clung to my leg as I moved about, her presence the only solace in the chaos. When the guests arrived, Evelyn greeted them with a wide smile. She played the gracious host, completely ignoring my efforts in making the event possible. I stayed in the background, quietly ensuring everything ran smoothly, until I overheard one of the guests. "Is that your daughter-in-law?" a woman asked, her voice dripping with faux concern. "She seems out of her depth." Evelyn laughed lightly. "She tries, bless her heart, but there's always room for improvement." My stomach twisted at her words, but I forced myself to remain invisible, biting back tears. When the gathering finally ended, Evelyn wasted no time expressing her dissatisfaction. "You call this clean?" she snapped, motioning to the spotless living room. "And the tea sandwiches? Overcooked?" "Honestly, Delia, it's embarrassing." Thomas walked in as she berated me, his expression hardening. "Can't you just get it right for once?" he said, his tone laced with disappointment. "You're making us look bad." The weight of their combined disdain pressed down on me. I felt small, insignificant, but I knew I couldn't crumble. Not yet. A week later, the final betrayal came. I returned home from picking Alice up from preschool to find Evelyn and Thomas in the living room, deep in conversation. Their voices hushed when they saw me, and Evelyn offered a thin, smug smile. I sensed something was amiss. "Delia, we need to talk," Thomas said, his voice unusually formal. He gestured for me to sit, though he and Evelyn remained standing. A power play I didn't miss. "What's going on?" I asked, my heart racing. Thomas cleared his throat. "We've made a decision. Mother is moving in permanently. It's better for everyone." "What?" My voice wavered. "Where would she stay? How?" "She'll take the guest room," he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And to make space, I've decided to sell some of your mother's things." The air left my lungs. "You've what?" "It's not a big deal," Evelyn chimed in, her voice syrupy. "It's just old furniture and keepsakes. Things taking up space." My mind reeled. The guest room was my sanctuary, the one corner of the house where I could keep a piece of my identity. And my mother's belongings. They were irreplaceable. "You had no right," I said, my voice shaking with anger. Thomas's face darkened. "Don't make this a bigger deal than it is, Delia." "You're being dramatic." I stood, trembling. "You don't get to decide this without me. Those were my mother's things. They meant something. And this is my house," he snapped. "I'll do what's necessary for the family." The words stung like a slap. My house. Not ours. Not mine. The truth was laid bare. I was a guest in the home I had helped build, an outsider in my own life. That night, as I sat in the dark with Alice asleep beside me, I felt the enormity of my situation. I had sacrificed everything, my career, my independence, my peace, for a man who saw me as nothing more than a convenience. Evelyn's presence would only solidify my role as an unpaid servant, and Thomas's disregard for my feelings was a clear signal that things would never improve. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider a future without them. It was a terrifying thought, but as I looked at Alice's peaceful face, I knew I couldn't let her grow up thinking this was normal. I needed to protect her, to show her that love didn't have to hurt. I decided then and there to fight back, not with arguments or futile pleas for respect, but with a plan. I would reclaim my life, one step at a time, and when the time came, I would leave this house and its toxic occupants behind, forever. The betrayal may have broken something inside me, but it also ignited a fire. I was done being their scapegoat. It was time to take control. The days following Thomas's declaration about Evelyn moving in permanently were some of the most isolating of my life. Evelyn seized her newfound authority with gusto, treating the house like her personal kingdom and me as little more than a servant. Thomas, emboldened by her presence, had become colder, his patience with me worn down to nothing. But something had shifted within me too, a simmering determination I kept hidden beneath the surface. I started taking small steps to prepare for my escape. Late at night, after Alice was asleep and the house was quiet, I researched my options on an old laptop I'd managed to keep hidden. I looked up legal resources, shelters, and financial aid programs for women in my situation. I had little money of my own, but I began stashing away what I could: loose change, small amounts from grocery runs, and even a few small bills I found discarded in Thomas's coat pockets. One afternoon, while cleaning the living room, Evelyn cornered me with another of her petty demands. "Delia," she snapped, "you need to do a better job of dusting. Look at this." She ran a finger along the edge of the bookshelf and held it up as if she'd uncovered a crime scene. "It's just a little dust," I replied, struggling to keep my voice even. "I'll clean it again." "A little dust?" she scoffed. "No wonder this house is falling apart under your care." Her words burned, but I bit my tongue. There was no use arguing with her. Instead, I silently noted every insult and every petty criticism, adding them to the growing list in my notebook. Thomas, of course, sided with her when he returned home that evening. "Why can't you just listen to her?" he said, exasperated. "She's trying to help keep things in order. She's trying to make me feel small." I shot back, my anger finally bubbling to the surface. "And you're letting her." His face darkened. "Watch your tone, Delia. You live here because I allow it. Don't forget that." It was the first time he had said the quiet part out loud. Any illusions I'd held about our marriage being a partnership dissolved in that moment. I was not his wife. I was his subordinate. That night, I stayed up late, poring over the journal where I documented every slight, every insult, every moment of disrespect. I knew I couldn't endure this much longer. My plan had to take shape quickly. The next day, I quietly reached out to a lawyer recommended by a women's resource center I'd found online. The initial consultation was free, and though I was nervous, the lawyer's calm demeanor put me at ease. "You have rights, Delia," she said firmly after I explained my situation. "If you can provide evidence of the emotional abuse and financial control, you'll have a strong case for custody and financial support." Evidence. That word echoed in my mind as I left her office. I had my journal, but I needed more, something concrete, undeniable. That night, I purchased a small recording device and discreetly began documenting the verbal abuse I endured daily. The tension at home continued to escalate. Evelyn's criticisms became sharper, her tone dripping with condescension. Thomas, too, grew bolder, no longer bothering to mask his disdain. One evening during dinner, he lashed out over something as trivial as the way I'd cooked the roast. "Can't you do anything right?" he sneered, slamming his fork onto the table. "I'm doing my best," I said quietly, my hands trembling. "Well, your best isn't good enough," he shot back. "Maybe if you weren't so useless." "That's enough," I interrupted, my voice shaking but firm. "I won't let you talk to me like that anymore." The room fell silent. Evelyn stared at me, her expression one of shock and anger, while Thomas's face turned red with fury. "Don't you dare raise your voice at me," he growled, standing from his chair. "I'm not raising my voice," I said, steadying myself. "I'm setting a boundary." He glared at me, his fists clenched, but I didn't back down. For the first time, I felt the power shift, even if just slightly. Over the next few weeks, I continued to gather evidence and quietly put my escape plan into action. I opened a separate bank account in my name, using an old ID card Thomas had forgotten existed. I transferred small amounts of money whenever I could, careful not to arouse suspicion. I also began reaching out to friends I'd lost touch with over the years, cautiously rebuilding a support network. One of those friends, Mia, was particularly eager to help. She offered me a spare room in her apartment if I ever needed a place to stay. "You don't have to do this alone, Delia," she said one evening over the phone. "When you're ready, just say the word." Her words brought me a sense of comfort I hadn't felt in years. Knowing I had somewhere to go made the prospect of leaving seem less daunting. The breaking point came one evening when Evelyn and Thomas confronted me together. They accused me of being ungrateful, lazy, and a bad mother, their voices overlapping in a barrage of insults. Evelyn even suggested that Alice would be better off in her care, a statement that made my blood run cold. "You're nothing without us," Thomas spat, his face inches from mine. "You'd be out on the streets if it weren't for me." I stared at him, unflinching. "We'll see about that," I said quietly, my voice steady, despite the fear coursing through me. That night, as they slept, I packed a small bag for Alice and me. I left a note on the kitchen table, short, direct, and final. "Thomas, I'm leaving. Don't try to find us. This is the last time you'll control me." With Alice in my arms, I walked out of that house for the last time, my heart pounding but resolute. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt free. I wasn't running away. I was reclaiming my life. The night Alice and I left was one of the longest of my life. I drove to Mia's apartment in silence, glancing at Alice in the rearview mirror every few seconds to reassure myself that we were truly free. She was fast asleep, her small face serene for the first time in what felt like forever. I clung to that image as I pulled into Mia's driveway, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. Mia greeted us with open arms, pulling me into a hug as tears streamed down my face. "You're safe now, Delia," she said softly. "Take all the time you need to figure things out." Her words were a balm to my soul. For the first time in years, I felt supported, seen, and understood. I settled Alice into the spare room, covering her with a warm blanket and pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We're going to be okay," I whispered, more to myself than to her. The next morning, I met with my lawyer, Mrs. Carter, who reviewed the evidence I'd been gathering, the recordings, journal entries, and photographs of bruises from Thomas's aggression painted a damning picture. "This is solid, Delia," she said, her tone firm yet compassionate. "We'll file for divorce and request full custody of Alice. You've done everything right." Her words gave me hope, but the road ahead was daunting. I knew Thomas wouldn't let go easily. His temper, his pride, everything about him would resist losing control over me and Alice. But I was ready to fight. I had to be. True to form, Thomas reacts explosively when he is served with the divorce papers. He called me repeatedly, leaving angry voicemails that oscillated between threats and pleas. "You'll regret this, Delia," he snarled in one message. "You're nothing without me." I blocked his number, refusing to let his words shake my resolve. Mia and Miss Carter both reminded me to stay strong, and I leaned on them heavily during those early weeks. Alice, too, became my anchor. Her laughter, her resilience. It reminded me of what I was fighting for. As the legal proceedings progressed, I began to rebuild my life. I found a part-time job at a local cafe where the flexible hours allowed me to spend time with Alice. The work was simple, but the independence it gave me felt monumental. For the first time in years, I had my own income, my own sense of purpose. Mia's apartment became a safe haven, a place where Alice and I could heal. I painted her room in soft pastel colors, filling it with books and toys she loved. Watching her play without the weight of fear in her eyes was the greatest gift. In the midst of this newfound peace, I received a call from Ms. Carter. "Delia, there's something you need to know," she began. "Thomas has been under investigation for fraud and embezzlement. The private investigator your cousin hired uncovered substantial evidence. This could impact our case significantly." I was stunned. Fraud? Embezzlement? It wasn't entirely surprising. Thomas had always been manipulative, but the implications were staggering. "What does this mean for Alice and me?" I asked. "It strengthens your case," she assured me. "If convicted, Thomas's parental rights could be severely limited. It also explains his financial instability, which we'll use to argue for your full custody." The court date arrived sooner than I expected, and my nerves were frayed as I walked into the courtroom. Ms. Carter guided me every step of the way, her confidence a steadying force. Thomas was there, his usual arrogance replaced by a palpable tension. His lawyer looked equally grim. The evidence Ms. Carter presented was irrefutable. The recordings of Thomas's threats and insults, the journal documenting years of abuse, the private investigator's findings, all of it painted a clear picture of his character. Thomas's lawyer tried to deflect, but the judge saw through the facade. When the judge finally spoke, my heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear his words. "Based on the evidence presented, I grant full custody of Alice to Mrs. Delia. Additionally, Mr. Thomas will pay child support and alimony as determined by the court. His involvement in fraudulent activities will be addressed in a separate criminal trial." Relief washed over me. So overwhelming I felt lightheaded. I had won. Alice and I were free. Life after the trial felt like stepping into the sunlight after years in a dark cave. I moved into a small apartment of my own, cozy and filled with warmth. Alice adjusted quickly, her stutter fading as her confidence grew. She made friends at school, her laughter filling our home like music. I threw myself into my new job, eventually earning a promotion that allowed me to work from home part-time. The extra income gave us stability, and I was able to enroll Alice in dance classes, something she'd always dreamed of. One evening, as I tucked Alice into bed, she looked up at me with a smile. "Mommy, we're happy now, aren't we?" she asked. I kissed her forehead, my heart swelling with gratitude. "Yes, sweetheart. We're happy, and we're safe." Months later, I received an unexpected call. It was Thomas, his voice subdued and desperate. "Delia, I've lost everything. Please, I want to see Alice." I felt no anger, no hatred, only pity. "Thomas, Alice doesn't need the chaos you bring. Focus on fixing your life. We're moving forward." I hung up, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. This chapter of our lives was closed, and I was ready to embrace the future. Alice and I had found our peace, our freedom, and our joy. We had rebuilt our lives from the ground up, stronger and brighter than before. And for the first time, I felt truly free. Months turned into years, and life became a steady rhythm of peace and growth for Alice and me. Our little apartment, once a modest refuge, had transformed into a warm and vibrant home. Alice blossomed in ways I hadn't dared to hope for. Her confidence grew, her laughter came freely, and her stutter disappeared entirely. Watching her thrive became my greatest joy and my constant motivation to keep building our new life. I had found my own strength in the process. The part-time cafe job had led to a managerial position, and I was now earning enough to provide Alice with the stability she deserved. Every accomplishment, big or small, felt like a triumph over the years of darkness we had endured. I even started volunteering at a local women's shelter, using my experiences to help others escape situations like mine. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Alice and I were painting flower pots on the balcony when a familiar number flashed across my phone screen. It was Thomas. I hadn't heard from him since the court ruled in our favor, but the weight of his name still made my stomach clench. "Delia," he began, his tone cautious and subdued. I wanted to apologize." His words were unexpected, but they didn't soften the walls I had built around my heart. "Thomas, I've moved on. Alice and I are happy now. I hope you find a way to rebuild your life, but we don't need you in ours." There was a long pause before he spoke again, quieter this time. "I understand. Take care of her." I hung up, feeling a strange mix of relief and closure. That call was the last thread tying me to the man who had once held so much control over my life. Now, it was severed. As time went on, I began to look back on our journey with pride rather than pain. The scars Thomas had left were still there, but they no longer defined me. Instead, they served as a reminder of my resilience and the love I had for Alice, which had carried us through. Alice and I created new traditions together, filling our days with laughter, creativity, and joy. On her 8th birthday, she asked if she could invite her friends over for a sleepover. It was a simple request, but it symbolized so much more. For the first time, our home was a place filled with light, where Alice could be a carefree child without the shadows of our past looming over her. One evening, as I tucked Alice into bed, she wrapped her small arms around my neck and whispered, "I love you, Mommy. Thank you for keeping me safe." Tears welled in my eyes as I kissed her forehead. "I love you too, sweetheart. You've made me so proud." In that moment, I knew we were exactly where we were meant to be. The years of hardship had shaped us, but they didn't define us. We were free to dream, free to laugh, and free to live the life we had fought so hard to build. As I closed her bedroom door, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Our story wasn't one of tragedy, it was one of triumph. And in the quiet of our little home, I finally allowed myself to believe in a future full of hope.